Okay, so welcome to the Self Recovery Now podcast. This is the first podcast ever, and with me is Lee Boyce. Lee Boyce is a very sought-after personal trainer that I've been working with. We used to work together a lot, and he's a writer for T Nation. He's also now a writer for Men's Fitness. And Lee, welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, so Lee, before we get going, I'd just like you to just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the whole physical culture industry.
Well, pretty broad question. What happened was, of course, I was athletic in school, as a lot of us who start out are. Athletic in school through high school. I learned about kinesiology being offered as an exercise science course in high school, so I was definitely quick to jump on that and take the course, and I liked it so much I took it twice. And after I did that, it was pretty much a shoo-in for the next step that I wanted to take. I figured that, as I'm doing all this sports stuff, now I'm trying to study it in the academic world. I decided to continue with it into university, and I attended York University, where I was studying some kinesiology and also running track at the same time. So it just went hand in hand with one another, and once I realized the track wasn't going to go much further than the varsity level for me and the club level for me, and not to a certain level like international level, I decided that, if I'm not going to work as an athlete, then I've got to work with athletes or do something athletic for work. And so that's where personal training came into it. And that was a good move because I'm pretty satisfied with it so far, and it's doing pretty well.
Absolutely, and I think you do fantastic work. I've seen a lot of your work firsthand. So before we go in, the topic that I'm going to be talking about is basically my business mostly about helping people recover, doing self-corrective exercises in order to, increase their recovery from any kind of injury that they may go after. But a big idiom in medicine is that when you see these symptoms, it's usually a little too late. So this is a little more preventative, and a lot of injuries occur in the gym. There's a lot of recreational gym users out there, and I mean, you've worked in the industry for a long time. You've seen a lot of people do some of the stupidest things ever, and I'm sure we can go on for hours about this, but I want to get into some of the more common mistakes that a lot of people do when they're working out or when they go into a gym to work out any kind of muscle group, or they have some sort of goal, what they're trying to seek out, and what they're actually doing wrong. A lot of people like to go into what people do right, but we're going to focus on a lot of mistakes today. So why don't we start with some mistakes that you see first off in the gym? We'll start with a warm-up.
With warm-ups, mistakes, the typical warm-up set is a very common one that I see all the time, where if you're doing a workout that involves bench press, for example, they just start with a lighter version of the same exercise.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And that's a major problem because of the fact that, you're only training one motor pattern to work. You're not really encouraging a lot of blood flow to other muscle groups that might need it. And you're not really addressing your body from a more holistic perspective, which could be, the need for scapular stability while you do a bench press. Now, it's difficult to try and expect somebody who's just a beginner or just a recreational weightlifter to really know that that's what they've got to do, but you have to think, or you have to have an open mind to learning about how the body works before you start blasting it with weights. And so when it comes to exercise, a warm-up where it includes exercise that could help for scapular stability or shoulder circumduction or other things like that can really help to mobilize and to stabilize the respective areas.
Definitely. So if you were to take clients through a workout and they were going to start with a bench press or some sort of chest-related exercise, what's the first thing that you would normally take them through? I'm a big believer in starting off with a lot of foam rolling, and I almost never see anyone doing that before they even start their workout or even at all.
So
and you also write a lot about,
something that I'd employ as well.
Oh, yeah, and you write about a lot of tissue quality. I mean, you mentioned that a lot in your articles. Do you mind going on a little bit about that for me?
Yeah, so tissue quality is really important because of the fact that people think that stretching is the same thing, but it's not the same thing. It's the equivalent of getting like a deep tissue massage versus just lengthening the tissue. If your muscles are bound and tight and then you rank on them and pull on them, they're probably going to return to the same position because they're not the greatest quality to actually take to the stretch that you're putting them through. So if you do something to manipulate your muscle tissue, which is equivalent to getting somebody to actually physically manually work on you, like a foam roller, like a lacrosse ball, like a tennis ball, like a golf ball, or whatever have you, it's going to really help make your muscle tissue a lot more malleable so that when you do act to lengthen it afterwards, you're really going to take to that stretch a little bit better, and you're going to have a much more supple muscle tissue, which will be much more responsive and adaptive to the demands of the workout when you're actually lifting weights.
Absolutely. What is your opinion of, I'll see this is a huge area in the gym. A lot of people they'll probably like run for 30, 45 minutes, and then it'll go right into a weight set. Some of the risks are. I'm not a big proponent of that, but what is your opinion of that?
Well, if it's just like the cardio before weights thing, I don't think that it's the greatest idea.
Absolutely.
You're going to tap into your glycogen stores a little bit too much so that you don't have too much energy for the real hard stuff, which is the lifting weights, or at least it should be harder than the cardio session. And that could run you into some problems and can really deplete a lot of your strength. And I'm not too much of a big fan of that at all.
Right, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about just general weight training and form. I'm going to go into some form maybe with like standing with dumbbells and so forth. How do you normally address people with form, and how do you determine who has bad form or who has good form?
We'll
start with just free weights.
Okay, with free weights, with the kind of clients that I've been dealing with, especially over the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 years, a lot of them are going to already have posture-related issues that are above and beyond what the typical posture-related issues we see every day are. Everybody's going to have cranial tilt. Everyone's going to have a little bit of shoulder pronation and internal rotation of the shoulder and the upper arm. And that's common. We'll see that every day on the street because life is in front of us. However, with the kind of people that I've been working with, especially over the last little while, we've got more severe cases of that, accompanied by things like excessive kyphotic spine in the mid-region, mid-back region, excessively tight hips to create a big lordosis as well at the same time. And you're going to see how that translates over when you start doing a load-bearing exercise as well, and how much these issues could stand to be exacerbated if you don't take the proper precautions. So when it comes to coaching form and technique, it really comes down to, and really I can't stress this enough, it comes down to really worrying about the basics. It might take a little while of doing drills and doing activation techniques with them, activation exercises with them, and a lot of soft tissue work to get them into the groove of creating the right motor patterns that their strong muscles are used to dominating and their weak muscles are used to not entering at all.
That's right.
So, a lot of taking things back 2 or 3 notches before you even get into the good stuff or the weight training exercises is key, just so they can ingrain those skills.
Right, and I think that's great that you do teach that because, a lot of people, they go to classes to learn martial arts or whatever, but it's really hard to find good coaches that teach proper lifting. You can't really go to a class and learn that. There's a lot of these, Jackie brain trainers that teach a lot of strange things, but with quality lifting, with a few rules, Charles Taylor talks about when you walk into lift weights, he talks about, making sure you ground yourself and making sure no one can move you, and also squeezing the dumbbells very tightly anytime you're doing any sort of lift, whether it's a press or a bicep curl, anything like that. What are your thoughts on that in terms of standing form?
Standing form, so, like what you said there, grip on the ground with the feet is very important, and the grip on the dumbbells is also very important too. You have to be able to put your mind into your muscle and know what muscle you're trying to recruit before you just start blindly lifting weights as well. That's a really important fact that a lot of people don't think about, and they just go through the motion of, say, a bench press or, say, a standing press, since we're talking about standing exercises, and they don't really think about recruiting, the muscles in their abdominals and the muscles of their shoulders, for example, as 2 really important key players there. And it could really take away from, A, the efficiency of the movement, and B, you could really be putting yourself to more injury risk because of the fact that there's not quite as many contributing muscles as there could be to the exercise. So, I'd say, applying your mind and your mindset to it is a really important thing. And what else? There's so many different cues that you can give for standing form, so I don't know, you name it.
Yeah. I actually just answered my question. I was going to talk about what are some of the risks of people, kind of lifting weights. You'll see some people lifting, with no effort. They're just sort of standing there dead and just sort of picking up the weights and putting them back down, and they're not really thinking about anything when they're doing it. So I'm glad you mentioned, conscious effort. But, I'm a big believer that people should, stand firm, stand still like a martial artist, and if you try and push them over, they can't be pushed over when they're doing any sort of standing movement.
Right.
So my next question is about, we'll get into some exercises in the gym that I think put people at a tremendous amount of risk for injury, but somehow it's still popular in the gym, and I'm really not sure why. So the first exercise I'll start with is, what are your thoughts on upright rows?
So upright row, this is very funny. I can see exactly where this question series is going to go right here, and I hope it goes the direction that I'm about to talk about, because it's going to be great.
Okay, good.
Upright rows are they're a contraindicated exercise in the sense that, a lot of people will have a shoulder structure, or
right.
the build of their shoulder from a skeletal perspective, it's going to be not conducive to them doing an exercise like an upright row, which is what the position is that it puts you in is internally rotated while bearing load. And this is never healthy for your shoulder to be internally rotated to such a degree and bearing load, especially when you're fixed.
Thank you. That's right. Yeah.
You don't have any freedom of mobility from your elbow joint or from your hand to have integrity of movement from there. And because of that, that fixed position that you're stuck in while internally rotated and bearing load, it can be harmful for a lot of people who have an acromion process that hangs over pretty far. And they're different. If you take a look at like anatomy books and things like that, you'll see.
Wait. Okay, we're.
Man, I was on a roll, man.
Yeah, you were on a roll. Sorry, we just went into a non-planned commercial break. There's no commercials in this. I don't know why I did that. Sorry about that. That was a little technical error, so we'll just get back online. So backing into the topic, Lee, I know you want to roll before I interrupted. So the role we were talking about shoulder injuries, and mostly with regards to
upright rows.
Yeah, upright rows.
So what I was saying before we got cut there was the fact that different people's skeletal anatomy, it could be varying in injury risk for which people we're talking about. And if you look at a lot of anatomy books, they'll show cross sections of people's shoulder joint, like the AC joint, and the junction of the glenoid fossa and where the humerus attaches in there, that whole complex. And when you look at the varying degrees to which your acromion process hangs over towards the anterior side of the body, towards the shoulder, over the shoulder, the acromion process can hang over a little bit, it can hang over a normal amount, or it can hang over really far.
That's
and
right, yeah.
People who it hangs over really far, or even the normal amount, as soon as you rotate inwards and you start bearing load, it's like you're almost for sure going to have some kind of an abrasion injury towards your bursa pad that lies beneath your acromion process in between the acromion and the deltoid, or right on the deltoid muscle itself, but you're going to ask for some kind of tissue, well, what's the word I'm looking for? Some kind of irritation or aggravation that'll turn into an otis or an itis for sure.
Right.
And you don't want to mess around with an exercise like an upright row if you're using a fixed barbell. Superior alternative to that would be if it causes less pain or no pain, then go for a dumbbell version of the upright row, or change your upright row into a high pull so that you don't have to go shoulder dominant on the way up, and you could just let the shoulders work on the eccentric and let the traps contribute on the way up. And that would be a really good tip for a lot of people. So yes, upright row is contraindicated in my books. I don't like to use the exercise much with anybody, and if I do, it's usually in the form of a high pull.
Okay, fantastic. That's fantastic advice. Actually, you stole that from me. I was going to get into the high pull being a fantastic alternative for that. But I like your ideas on using dumbbells as well. I'm not really I don't really like the exercise at all. I never really give it to clients, but I think dumbbells, if clients absolutely have to do it, I think it's a great idea. But this is going to kind of lead me on to my other topic. You were talking about upright rows and the kind of danger that it puts the shoulder in. I think another dangerous aspect of upright rows is the fact that it overtrains the upper traps. And I think the upper traps already get so much training as it is already, and that creates a lot of balance within the trapezius muscles, and that's going to cause a lot of shoulder injuries. And I'm going to get into my next question, which is with regards to shrugs, another exercise that I'm not a big fan of, and again, I think it can cause a lot of injury rather than give people some sort of benefit. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's 100% what you're saying is correct. I believe that shrugs are an exercise that you're already training in generally overtrained or overflexed muscle group in your upper trap.
Exactly.
And because of that, it could lead to perpetuating the certain muscle imbalances that you already have present if you're somebody who has muscle imbalances, and quite honestly, I've never met somebody who doesn't have muscle imbalances. And so for that reason, the upper traps don't need to be trained in isolation. It's a gym rat special, it's an exercise that you're going to see people trying to max out on all the time in any gym you go to.
Yeah.
And, that sometimes gets carried over into the world of personal training, where the trainers might be using that exercise themselves to get big or for whatever purposes, and they'll just apply it mindlessly to their clients who don't need it or shouldn't be doing it. And to be honest, 9 times out of 10, the trainers don't need to be doing it either.
Yeah.
So the upper traps exercises like the barbell shrug, it's not necessarily a staple. It shouldn't be a part of most people's routines if the goal is to improve your muscle balance and the goal is to improve physiological and musculoskeletal function, etc., it's not the greatest use of your time. Now, if it's for a cosmetic advantage that you're looking for to develop your traps, I still don't believe that it's a great time passer. And the reason why is because I've had the belief for a while that the traps must contain a high number of fast twitch muscle fibers, and because of that, the traps would respond better to more explosive things. So the high pull example is a good one, because the fact you have to move the weight at a higher velocity, and cleans, snatches, and the Olympic lift variations are really good for the traps because of that. And I usually use that to supplement any sort of hypertrophy work that I do in order to really give the traps some good training. I don't think I've ever done a shrug as a set in my life.
Fantastic. It's nice to hear that because, I think another reason why a lot of people love to do shrugs so much is because they feel like they're carrying a lot of weight, and it makes them think that they're getting stronger. You'll see people, they can easily shrug like 90, 95 pounds each hand, and, I guess it looks great to a lot of other people in the gym, but it's very ineffective, and it's not really a true test of how strong you are.
Exactly, and people just love it. It's good that you said that because people are so transfixed over the idea of what the most weight they can carry, whether it's for partial range, whether it's for poor reps, or whether it's for a silly exercise. And the traps being trained by way of doing barbell shrugs with 3 plates on the bar, I call that a silly move.
Oh, yeah.
It's not necessary to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. And so we're going to move on with another exercise that I think causes a lot of injury, and I see it a lot. I'm still not sure why I see this so much, despite the fact that this exercise has been ripped by, some of the top trainers in the world, but behind the head lat pull downs.
Right. So behind the neck lat pull downs, a lot of people think behind the neck anything is terrible for you. And, it's a blanket statement that's used a lot. I agree with it, but only to a certain degree. And here's the reason why, is that behind the neck pulling is different than behind the neck pushing, and it compromises different structures.
Okay.
Behind the neck pushing exercises are important to avoid because of compression that goes towards your cervical vertebrae. The bone structure and the vertebrae of the neck and the upper back, they take a lot of stress when you do exercise like that. Also pushes you into a cranial tilt if you can't really achieve that position regularly, and your head will get in the way, so you have to tilt your cranium forward.
Right.
Now, as for behind the neck pulling exercises, like a pull down, again, you're going to have the same issue with the tilting the cranium forward, but also it puts the shoulder in a really, really compromised position to have to rotate all the way back. And a lot of people who are into behind the neck movements are also into hypertrophy training.
Exactly, that's right.
Probably going to be tight to begin with. That means that they're probably not going to have the shoulder mobility that's necessary, and very few people do naturally anyway, to really perform a proper lift behind the neck, right? And even, I'm a pretty mobile guy, but even I find it very, very awkward to get my hands back there to perform reps of a fixed exercise pattern like a pull down. And, I mean, you've witnessed me going through full overhead squats and whatnot. I can get through that range of motion, but it's just, it doesn't feel right, and if it doesn't feel right, it's not something you should really be doing.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely, and a lot of problems, external and internal impingement can occur with any sort of behind-the-neck movement. And I think, I think a lot of individuals like to do it, but, they're not really suited for it. You were talking about mobility. I think unless you have the kind of mobility of a weightlifter, you really shouldn't be doing this at all.
Right.
Yeah. Or a gymnast. They're definitely pretty mobile too, right? But no, great answer, thank you. And my next question is, again, another big myth, and it's something I see in the gym a lot, and a lot of people squatting, and they're not sure how far to go down. Some people go full range of motion. Some people will they'll only stop at 90 degrees because they think that's the safe range, quote unquote. So what are your thoughts on squatting and in terms of people's range of motion and form that you'll generally see?
Right. So this is actually exactly where I knew the conversation would go when I had earlier in this conversation. And it's good that we bring this up because I just got into a lengthy debate about squatting during a practical assessment of a major certification body for personal training and what the particulars are with regards to squats.
Right.
So, there are many different schools of thought by the most elite coaches in the world when it comes to squatting and how to perform the movement. But where you'll see those deviations and those changes in opinion and thoughts and viewpoint, you will always see across the board one thing, and that is that squatting to full depth is important. squatting to full depth is something that you should work towards if you can't achieve it, and that it is a functional movement pattern. And I hate throwing that word around, but it really is something that's a primal movement pattern, and we all should be doing it. Myths are that it's bad for your knees to do so, and that it puts too much stress on your knees and your ACL and all sorts of things like that. And there are tremendous amounts of research out there that really, really proves against it or states against it. So, I mean, these shouldn't be subjects of debate anymore as to whether or not full squatting is bad for you or harmful for you. It's harmful for you if you do it to a deep depth that's too deep for your body at that time.
Exactly, yeah.
It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing it or you shouldn't be working towards it by making the modifications to your body that are necessary via assistance exercises, via mobility drills, via soft tissue work to get down there. Because if you take any picture, or if anybody who's listening to this has a kid who's very young, and you watch them bend down to pick something up, you'll never see them bend down from the waist. You're going to see them get into a full depth squat with their heels flat on the ground and their spine straight as a board. It's a squat that most Olympic lifters would covet if they saw. So if you watch babies squat, and they're the most primitive creatures that are out there, then there's no reason why we should be moving away from being able to recreate that position.
I agree.
The only thing that we've developed from infancy to now is muscle imbalances in some way, shape, or form. We start getting tight. Babies are brand new. We know how to. You know what it is.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic answer. I like the fact that we only develop imbalances as we get older. That's great. But it amazes me. You talk about governing bodies, and there's a lot of governing bodies that I think use the most outdated and pathetic research in order to validate what they consider to be a proper squat, which is, why I think a lot of certifications are losing a lot of respect in the industry. But with regards to
this particular certification actually lost a lot of my respect as a result of what happened to me in the last little while with regards to all of what I just told you there.
Yeah.
It's very, very, it's interesting because there's like a power, there's an air of power that a lot of these instructors will have just because of the fact that they've been, in some way a part of the industry or doing these invigilations or evaluations for their certification body as hallowed figures in that body for the last 15 years, 20 years, or whatever, and they don't stay up to date with research, or the research that they once had under their belt, they let it fall off and they let it get stale, so they forget a lot, or they just simply don't know. See, I'm still in the process of trying to figure out exactly what the criteria and the requirements are to become somebody who certifies other people and somebody who evaluates other people to make them take on the title as being certified by this body or that body. And I can't really say that whatever it is, it's either A, being followed to a T, or B, that I can respect it. Because if you were to hear the conversations that I had, it was backwards. It didn't make any sense, and it started getting personal almost because of how much of a mismatch in knowledge there was. And these are things that aren't really subject to debate by way of opinion versus opinion. It's more like looking at the body's anthropometry, physiology, structure, anatomy, and geometry. So it didn't make any sense to me, and I'm still rattled by it, to be honest.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you brought that up because it seems like a lot of researchers like to hold on to their values almost like a religion, and you almost see that in the gym a lot. And I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on that? Because you see that not just with researchers, but almost anyone in the gym. You try and advise somebody in the gym saying, well, you shouldn't really be squatting like that, or you really shouldn't be deadlifting like this, and so forth. And they're gonna go bananas on you just because you're trying to help them.
Right. And if it comes down to an ego thing, then whatever. You're gonna have to just leave that person alone. But when it starts coming down to let's say one trainer who's well educated versus another trainer who's well educated having a debate on an exercise like a squat or an exercise like a press or whatever have you, we have to remember that you can use your knowledge and whatever and say that you want this exercise to be performed this way, and you're right, and then the next person says they want it to be performed this way, and they're not wrong either. But if you're basing all of it, just comes down to what you pursue as a trainer yourself. Because if you get your information and you start training your clients and you start training yourself, all based on one set of methodologies from one coach from one book, then sure, you'll keep somebody safe, then you'll keep yourself safe. Like, I'm sure that it's fine, logical, valid information. But it's only one set of information when there's a plethora out there, right? And because of that, it starts throwing people into a one-track-minded approach to training, and that there's only one way to do this. And, of course, if you're educated enough, then you're going to know that across the board there are very basic principles that every major trainer and every big-time strength coach will agree upon. But when it comes to the particulars, that's when there starts becoming variety in opinion and variety in science and so on and so forth. And you have to keep an open mind to this stuff. And if you're capable of being a good trainer and keeping an open mind to all of the information and resources that are out there and the methods that are out there, then it'll make things a lot easier for you, and it'll make you develop a lot better because you'll be able to pick and choose from different pools of information that are out there and apply it and create your style and be known for what you are known for.
No, definitely, and I completely agree. And another thing I just wanted to touch on is since we're talking about form, you talked about individuality, and individuality goes. There are basic principles, and then you should also become individual because for someone like you, for example, you got a massive femur. So if someone sees you squatting and they say, no knees over toes, I mean, like, what are you gonna say, right? Like, everybody should be.
Yeah, I mean, that knees over toes thing is like, that's got to be one of my biggest pet peeve lines in the world.
Not Absolutely, yeah, same here.
Just in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, like, if you were to walk up or down a flight of stairs, like, I want somebody to give me an example of a functional load-bearing movement in everyday life where your knees don't pass your toes and you can still get away with the exercise.
That's a great question. I should ask that. Yeah.
But even proper sprinting mechanics.
Yeah.
Sprinting mechanics. That's unload. Like, even that, your knee is going to be forward over your toe when you're in your running A position. Like, it has to happen.
Yeah.
Walking upstairs, the same thing. And I don't know how many different ways I can reiterate this for somebody to realize that knees passing the toes is something that you do unloaded. It's something that you do bearing load, and so therefore it's something that you should do correctly when you're lifting weights.
Yeah, I agree.
And I haven't even brought into it the whole anthropometry thing, like myself, who has, a 36-inch inseam. when it comes to my knees and where they're positioned, even when I'm sitting down right here in my chair right now, I'm at a 90-degree angle at the hip, and my knee is way over my toe just because of how long my femur is.
Exactly.
When you have somebody who's long-legged, or they have a longer femur than they do a tibia, like, what choice do you have? Or else I'm going to be stuck doing quarter squats for the rest of my life.
Yeah, there you go. And, since we're, one final question before we move on, what do you say are some of the biggest dangers of not squatting with knees over toes or improper squat patterns?
So this is actually part of the response that I gave to this particular instructor.
Oh, yeah? Great, good.
Having that debate. Part of the response was that, if the knees don't pass the toes and you keep on performing the movement pattern where you're only going to a 90-degree angle or above that or whatever because your knees start getting in the way, then you're only going to load your quadriceps and maybe your lower back and very minimally your posterior chain. It's not going to get involved at all. And so then that could even result in subtle shearing forces, I could say, because of the fact that your quads are taking so much of a load, your hamstrings don't have the chance to co-contract at the same time because you're not getting down deep enough.
Yeah.
And so then it's going to result in, like, patellar pain, chronic knee pain like that, ACL stress. It could be a whole bunch of issues that you have. And at the same time, your hips will shorten, so you will get lordotic, and, it can just result in a whole lot of problems that you don't necessarily want to have to deal with at all. And, that's why squatting to full depth is really important.
Exactly. I agree completely with that, and it pisses me off to no extent how many people don't do that. But anyway, it's I think the gym world is just about as stupid as just about every other world. It's just the weak are just trying to get weaker. Okay, so the next question I'd like to get into when it comes to lifting is we were talking about bench press a little bit earlier on. I'd like to get into bench press. There's a lot of people out there talking about bench press and how terrible it is for the shoulders. What are your thoughts on that? Dan John, recently I heard him say something great. He said that the way you bench press or the way you squat, it's not the exercise that hurts you, it's the way you do it. And I love that statement. And if you can go in a little bit about bench pressing and, is it really that bad for the shoulders? And
I mean, again, I really hope that there are a lot of young trainers out there who are listening to this because of the fact that, your classic certification bodies are going to say the same thing. We're training the general population, and because we're training the general population, we should be only going down to 90 degrees in a squat or bench press because of the risks that there are for your shoulders or for your knees or for your hips. And it's so silly that authorities or supposed authorities are going ahead and saying something like this, because of the fact that it creates these blanket statements that they make create a whole lot of they're certifying the trainers. And so that's what creates bad trainers right out of the gate, because they're going to take that information and run with it and be okay with it and spread the word that this information that they're being taught is correct. And that's not cool. I have a major problem with that. Now, when it comes to the bench press particularly, it's good that you talked about Dan John. The exercise isn't the thing that you have to look at as the contraindicated thing, but the person or the person's skeleton is what you have to look at as contraindicated, because what's good for one person's skeleton or their body or their musculature might not be good for the other person's musculature or skeleton or body. And when it comes to the bench press, I'm a great example of that as well. It's a lot of distance that the bar is going to travel from my chest to a full lockout.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if I didn't get into the correct positions when it comes to bench pressing, then my elbow would drop so far below the bench that my shoulder complex would take a hell of a lot of stress that I wouldn't be able to deal with, and it'd lead to all sorts of shoulder injuries and issues like that. Right? If my scapula wasn't stable, then the same thing would happen too. I'd have the weakest shoulder, and it'd be most vulnerable. If my grip was too wide, then I'd be putting my shoulder at even more risk. So, there's just so many different questions that you have to ask yourself or you have to ask a trainee before you just go and blindly say bench press is not an exercise you should be doing because it's bad for your shoulders, right? Like, how tall are you? Where are you holding the bar? What does your setup look like? Do you know how to bench press? Is your back strong at all? There's too many things to ask. What does your floor drive look like? Are you training with the proper technique whatsoever? So when it comes to bench press, there are people who definitely shouldn't be bench pressing. I'm sure the people with that shoulder complex stuff that I was talking about 20 minutes ago, that would definitely be a negative exercise for them to do. But aside from that, generally speaking, the bench press is very, very subjective. For some people, overhand, typical standard grip bench press won't cause them any pain, and it never will. And it's not bad for them either. It's a horizontal push, so all the stuff that people say about back arch and you shouldn't be arching your back off of the bench and, overarching is a bad thing, well, okay, minus the extremely severe versions of it where you're going for a competition and you have to minimize the amount of space the bar travels, a back arch has got to happen, because if you don't back arch, then you'll never be able to pull your shoulder blades together. And the shoulder blades being in the right place is like the root and the groundwork for having a strong, stable bench press.
Right.
You're looking at integrity of the shoulder here, and so the shoulder is stabilized because all four rotator cuff muscles originate on your scapula. So you have to pull your scapula tight and get them as stiff as possible, and the tightness is the key there, so that your shoulder can stay stable and not really be a prisoner of the exercise. So the back arch has to happen. The shoulders have to get pulled back. If you just stand up even and try to pull your shoulders back without letting your lower back arch, you'll realize that it's virtually impossible.
That's a great test. Yeah.
Right? And so just applying it from a completely logical perspective like that, to say that it's bad for you to arch your back when you're doing a horizontal push doesn't make sense. A, because it's not bad for your back. A, we're lordotic as it is. We have a curve. And B, we're pressing weight from our backs. And because of that, there's not going to be any sort of downward compressional force on the body or on the lower back from that, because the weight is in a completely different force angle. The setup is really important for bench press, and whether or not your shoulder can handle the stress of a horizontal push to begin with, and that's because of pre-existing conditions or injuries, that's what you have to look at. So from a person-to-person, contraindicated perspective, not an exercise contraindicated perspective, I love the bench press, and it's a great exercise.
I agree. Lee, fantastic answer. One other thing I wanted to touch on with bench pressing, you'll see a lot of these, powerlifter enthusiasts or wannabes in the gym, and they'll bench super, super wide. and then there's guys who do narrow. What are your opinions of grip? There's some people that say that narrow grip is a lot more shoulder friendly, and there's the big wide grip that the powerlifters do. What are your thoughts on that, and in terms of people with their width of their hands on the bench?
So the hand width is exactly what you said. With a narrower grip, you're going to have a lot more shoulder friendliness because of the fact the upper arm is moving closer to the torso.
That's right.
Therefore, it's not making the shoulder complex as vulnerable. You have to remember that when you use a narrower grip, you have to accommodate for where the bar is making its placement on the torso as well. Right? We always want to create that angle underneath the bar with our lower arm. We always want to have that vertical bar. So we're still lowering the bar to our upper chest, let's say, when we have a narrow grip, like a close grip bench, then we're not going to create the greatest geometrical angle underneath the bar, below the bar, to support the load. And so a joint is going to take stress, namely the elbow joint or the elbow and shoulder joint.
Yeah.
So the bar is going to have to move its weight down your torso a little bit when you make that placement or when you make that point of contact on the body. That's with a narrower grip. With a wide grip, the same thing. If we create an improper force angle while having a super wide grip, A, we're going to put the shoulders at a lot of stress because of the fact that our elbows are way out there, they're flared out. But B, it's going to be even more stressful for the shoulder and possibly the elbow joint too if we were creating this not torquing, but this stress or the strain on the body where there's not a vertical arm position underneath to support and drive the weight. We have to have the correct channel of energy. So, I generally like to use a narrower grip when it comes to bench pressing. Most people like to reference the two rings that powerlifters use that are 32 inches apart from one another in order to landmark where their hands belong.
Yeah.
Most people will put one of the fingers on that ring on either side.
Yeah.
I usually stay inside the rings. I usually stay with maybe my pinky finger or ring finger on the ring at the absolute widest when I'm doing a standard bench press.
Okay.
And with my arm length, that's pretty narrow if you were to see it in person.
No, definitely it is. Okay, great stuff, Lee. Thank you so much. One final thing I wanted to get into before we move on. This is so it's a little more based on injuries. How do you distinguish personally between a trauma injury and an overuse injury? I find the worst thing about we're talking about preventing bad injuries in the gym, but eventually it's going to happen. And a lot of injuries are overuse, and then a lot of injuries are just stupidity, and they're caused by trauma. And one of the biggest problems I've seen in the medical industry is that if somebody has a knee issue, they'll just look at the knee and they'll never look at anything that's surrounding. Never look for a weak synergist or anything else that might affect it. They'll just look at exactly what that issue is. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two. How do you personally distinguish if someone comes and they do have a certain injury, but they would like to continue with training, whether it's trauma or whether it's overuse?
Well, first of all, you ask them if they had any trauma to their muscles.
Well, taking a history,
Of course, you look at the immediate history.
Yeah.
On top of that, you look at the longer-term history as well. What do you do? Would you play a sport? Have you been doing this? Do you have an issue? And they'll be able to tell you if you're dealing with something that happened as a result of a repetitive thing, or if you're dealing with a chronic pain rather than if you're dealing with something that happened as a immediate trauma sort of thing. With overuse injuries, the symptoms are pretty clear. You're going to have irritation, inflammation, you're going to have duller pain. You're not going to have as excruciating pain.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to be out of the blue either. It's going to creep up on you, and it's going to not go away, and it's going to be nagging. So looking at the history of what these people or what the client is dealing with is the real important thing. With the chronic injury, the style of chronic injury, lots of the time, 90% of the time, you're dealing with stuff that you can treat or work with by activating muscles that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, whether it's some soft tissue work, once again, whether it's activating synergistic muscles or activating antagonistic muscles. You can always get to the root of the problem by looking at the body from a holistic angle. And with the acute kind of injury where it's dealing with a certain trauma right on the spot, then the issue is going to be more so a rehabilitative side of things where you actually do look at the site, you get the joint stronger or whatever have you, or you have to straight up rest the muscle or rest the joint and ice and work on things like that. So, it's pretty cut and dry as to whether you can determine whether something is chronic or whether it's more of an acute thing.
Okay. One thing that I find, especially with people who have an acute injury, is in screening them, is that Mike Robinson mentioned something interesting, and in most of my experience in the clinical world, I kind of agree, where he says, even though some people come to you with an acute injury, most of the time it's a chronic injury. For example, somebody comes to you with lower back pain because they were in a car accident or something like that. Normally it's because, they're they're very undertrained individuals. They're very deconditioned, and to be honest, they were just, it's just a needle on a haystack that just kind of caused them to break.
That's a good point. That's a really good point that I neglected to even mention, is that a lot of acute injuries can come as a result of not addressing a chronic injury that was underlying before.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And that's what Mike Robinson was definitely trying to say there. That was a really, really good point, actually, is that, if you have tight hips and you sit at your desk 5 days a week, 10 hours a day, and then you train the mirror muscles, so you do squats to halfway range, and you do other exercises like seated rows, or you do seated presses, or whatever have you, that just exacerbates the same muscle imbalance you've already got. Plus you keep shortening them by going to work every day, and then you start dealing with a little bit of back pain because the overrush is causing you from the pelvic tilt. And then you have the car accident later on. It's like the chronic pain just turned into a serious issue. Right, because the fact that now you've just thrown off a whole bunch of stuff, your vertebrae is misaligned, and blah 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 blah. So chronic pain can also, if they go untreated or unresolved, then they can turn into major issues. So it's important to be cognizant of what you do in the weight room and what you do out of the weight room, and you note your weak points. And it really comes down to training smart, and it comes down to training your weaknesses rather than thinking about the strong muscles all the time and the things that you're good at. Because the stuff that you're good at is probably the stuff you don't need to be doing as much.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because people in the gym, they just like to, I think people in general, they love to do what they're good at, and they just like to keep getting better and better at that, and you're really only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah.
Okay, Lee, so we've just come to the end of your interview. I'd just like to say thanks so much. I really appreciate you putting out your time today. You're in a lot of demand, and again, this was a fantastic interview talking about exercises that are just going to put people symptomatic and then eventually in some sort of clinic where I'm going to be looking at them. So thanks again for the interview. Again, I'm with Lee Boyce. Check him out at www.leeboycetraining.com. He's a writer of Men's Fitness, T Nation. Great guy. Thanks a lot, Lee.
No problem.